did what every introducer does. They say, Men's Health, look at me, and then smirk a little bit. I never quite understood that. Happens every time without fail. But yes, it is true. I was in Men's Health magazine. A quote about that many column inches. I was not on the cover, nor was I photographed anywhere in the magazine, but I was quoted in there. Thanks for bringing that up, Jerry. All right, glad you're here. We're going to talk about closing deals. We call it sealing the deal, how to make the close a foregone conclusion. And, we could talk about any part of the sales process, but since we're late in the afternoon, it makes sense to talk about closing deals. So, welcome officially, and we're going to start off with a little question here. And we're going to ask some people, what is your least favorite or most intimidating part of the sales process? And let's say we can boil it down to two parts of the sales process. Part one would be prospecting, and which is, interrupting people, initiating new relationships, going out there and manufacturing new clients that you can list their properties. Or let's say option number two would be closing the deal, asking for the business, calling the question, getting it all finished, getting them to sign the listing on the dotted line, so to speak. So if you find the first part, prospecting, to be the most intimidating or least favorite part of the sales process, please raise your hand. Okay, quite a few people said prospecting. And now if you would like to say that closing the deal, calling the question, asking for the business is your least favorite or most intimidating part, please raise your hand. It's very interesting. It's about 50-50 in here. About 50-50. That's unique, by the way. Most of the time, it's about 70 to 80% of the people would say prospecting. Is that a surprise? About 70 to 80% of the people would say prospecting, and only 20 to 30% would say closing the deal. And there are a lot of reasons for that, because a lot of people would say, though, by the time you get to the close, you already have a relationship, you already know the person if you've done things right, that the close should be, as it says in the title of the presentation, a foregone conclusion. But a lot of people still stress out about the close as well, because you get to the end, you don't want to lose the business or what have you. But it's always interesting to me why we sometimes dread the close. Even people who are, more of a prospecting makes me more nervous than closing will still say sometimes that they kind of will get a little bit uneasy when it comes time to close a deal. Does anyone know why, or anyone have any suggestions as to what it is that makes a person sometimes feel a little uneasy?
Their fear of rejection.
Fear of rejection. And that could be a lot of things, right? I mean, they could say no, and you have all of this stuff invested in it, and you think the time is right, and that can be kind of a blow to your ego if you ask and it's not the right time, right? So yeah, that's a pretty big reason. Anything else? Anything else why we would possibly get a little uneasy when it comes to closing time? Any other thoughts?
They don't want to get paid.
That you want to get paid, right? Yeah, right. We want to get paid. And to kind of expand on it, it's a very good answer. You are emotionally invested, okay? By the time you get to the close, you are emotionally invested. I will never forget when I was a very young professional, and I was in my mid-20s, and it was the first time I had ever had the opportunity to hire someone for a real job, a full-time salaried job with the benefits and the office and everything like that. And so I was all excited about this to hire my first real full-time job as opposed to, like a clerical or part-time job. And we really needed a good person in the office where I worked because there was a lot of stress going on. And I remember going through the interviews and the phone interviews and the second interviews and all this sort of thing. And we eventually isolated this one guy who was absolutely perfect for the job, right? And the more we talked about him, the more we talked to him, the more convinced I was that he was the most perfect candidate for the job. And I remember going through all of the rigmarole, the red tape and bureaucracy you had to go through with the human resources department and the boss's boss's boss and all of this garbage and BS that you had to do to get someone hired. And finally, we got to the point where the director of human resources said, okay, Jeff, you can go ahead and make the offer. Congratulations, hopefully he says yes. So I'm all excited, right? And I remember running downstairs to my office. I got into my office, I closed the door, I sat down at the desk, I started to pick up the phone, and all of a sudden I set the phone back down. Because my heart was pounding like this because I was afraid the candidate would say no, turn me down. Because at that point in time I was emotionally invested in the process. We get that way when we are working in real estate. We get emotionally invested when it comes time to make the close. We fear that. And as our, what's your name, sir?
Faithful.
Faithful?
Faithful.
Okay. Like you said, sometimes we've spent the money already, right? I mean, sometimes we've kind of figuratively or literally spent the money. But let me talk a little bit more about the whole ideal of rejection that you mentioned up here in the front row. That's a very real concern, even for people who've been at a selling job for some time. We sometimes worry in the prospecting phase that we sound like a pest, and of course, it's very emotional if we get turned down when it comes time to end a deal. But let me mention one thing about rejection and sales before we go any further. The fear of rejection is incredibly normal. So if you are one of those real estate agents who never has any fear of rejection, I guess you could say you are abnormal in a good way, because I guess I would be kind of envious of that. But most of us have this fear of rejection. Probably somewhere in the 98 to 99% of us range have some healthy fear of rejection. And the reason why that is normal for us to have that feeling is that it is hardwired, biologically driven. It is a part of our personality, a part of our DNA. In other words, humans evolved a fear of rejection in order to stay alive. Our fear of rejection keeps us alive, or at least it did back in ancient times. If you think about the way humans lived pre-civilization, we were kind of nomadic, and we lived in groups of people that we refer to as tribes, right? We lived in groups of people that we referred to as tribes. Why did we form tribes? Anyone have any idea why ancients formed tribes? Safety in numbers, right? Safety in numbers. Because if we were not a member of a tribe, we were lion food. I mean, we were basically killed. We were going to not make it if you weren't part of this group. The tribe bound together to help find food, defend itself from predators, build shelter, and create all sorts of things that help keep us alive. And therefore, we had an imperative as ancient human beings to make damn sure we were never kicked out. If we were ever rejected, kicked out of the tribe, we died. Okay, we were food. And so those people who were very good at getting along, keeping their head down, not rocking the boat, not ruffling the feathers, got to pass their DNA on, and eventually this concern and fear we have for rejection became hardwired into the DNA. It literally kept us alive. Well, now we get to 2018, and for the last couple thousand years, we've had civilization, and we've had amazing infrastructure that's been created. We have a technology infrastructure. We have a social infrastructure that's been created. We have businesses that have sophisticated models for distributing and providing food and other materials that are needed. Theoretically, you could decide today that you hate your friends and family, and you're going to cut off all ties with them, and while you might be a lonely, miserable bastard, you would live. You would live because of the structure that humans and civilization have created. You could still theoretically thrive. You could go to your work the next day and do just fine and not have to depend on your family or friends ever again, theoretically. But the fact that that's there doesn't take away this hardwired fear of rejection that is a part of our DNA and will probably be there for forever and ever. So that's the first thing. If you ever have any of those feelings when it comes time to closing, or by the way at the front end on prospecting, don't worry about it. It's totally normal. We just have to overcome that. And we'll talk about a few ways and a few things that we can do that. But let's go back more to this whole idea of closing, because a lot of us kind of feel a little bit uneasy about closing. And in addition to rejection, or fears of rejection, or fears of being disappointed when you are already planning on cashing the check, or fears of being let down after you're emotionally invested, there's another part of closing that sometimes makes us unfeel comfortable. And that part is depicted in this photograph. Anyone ever see this photograph before? Okay? Who can tell me what this photograph is from? It's a movie.
Glengarry Glen
Glengarry Glen Ross. We've got a couple of movie buffs in here. Glengarry Glen Ross was a movie that came out in 1992. And if you looked at that movie from one perspective, it was one of the most depressing damned movies you would ever watch in your life. But if you watched that movie from another perspective, especially the twisted, demented perspective from which I watch movies, it was flat out hilarious. One of the best dark comedies I've ever seen in my life. Glengarry Glen Ross, 1992 movie, was about a group of miserable, mediocre, middling, aging, close to retire but couldn't afford to retire salesmen. And I think they were all men. I think they were all salesmen, if I remember correctly. And they worked for this sleazy company. I think the company was in Chicago or somewhere up north like that. And they sold worthless subdivision ground in Arizona and Florida, right? It's, this was the stuff that created the subdivision laws that we all learned about in real estate school. Swamp land that you couldn't get to, or scorpion-infested, dried out land on the side of some dead mountain in southern Arizona, right? Worthless garbage land. And they worked in a hot box environment in which they were supposed to sell, right? But they were kind of just miserable guys that were just kind of coasting on their way to retirement and just failing miserably. Well, one day, the owners bring in this hotshot sales guy from the downtown office. And that guy right there, the actor Alec Baldwin, played that guy. And he came there with the express purpose of ripping these old sales guys a new one, so to speak. And he did a really good job. In fact, has anyone ever heard the term coffee is for closers? Okay, that term came from that movie, right? What happened is the character played by Jack Lemmon, right at the beginning of this Hot Shots presentation, goes and pours himself a cup of coffee. And this character here says, "Put that coffee down." He's like, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Coffee is for closers, not losers like you." So they played all of this stuff up. They even had a funny line. One of my funny lines was, they decided this guy comes, "We're announcing a new sales contest. First prize, a Cadillac. Second prize, a set of steak knives. Third prize, you fired." Okay, so that was the kind of guy. And it's absolutely hilarious. Great monologue scene. You have to be a little bit resolute of ear if you want to listen to it, because it's got about 9 or 10 F-bombs, but a good scene. And at one point, this character flips over this chalkboard and reveals this writing on there, and he goes, "A, B, C, always be closing." Anyone ever heard that term, always be closing? Anyone ever heard that? It's garbage. It's absolute garbage. Worst thing in the world that we can do is that hot box selling environment. And that whole mentality that some people have of salespeople, realtors included, is always be closing, ready to pounce at a moment's notice upon any unsuspecting victim or client that could possibly get us paid money, okay? A very old way of thinking, and one of the most liberating things I have for you today is that, fortunately, that doesn't work. What we want to do is just say no to cheesy sales closing lines. I am a sales consultant. I work with companies inside and outside of real estate all over the world, and one of my most amusing, one of the things I find most amusing about my profession are certain types of closes that will have a name to them. Okay, like the Ben Franklin close, the Abraham Lincoln close, the 1, 2, 3 close, the yes, yes, yes close. If anyone ever suggests that you should have a close in your repertoire that has a name attached to it, that's bad advice. Okay, if the close has a name, it's probably a bad thing, with one exception. Last night at dinner, I was sitting next to Mike Reedman, and I was telling him about my daughter, my little girl. She's a total introvert, but a deadly saleswoman. And she comes up to me at Hy-Vee a couple of years ago and says, "Dad, would you like to get me a Reese's or a Hershey's bar today?" And she had both of them in her hands. And at the time I said, "Great job, honey, forced choice close." But then I was like, wait a minute, I don't believe it. So I know what these closes are. I just don't advocate us using these closes. They don't work in real estate today. So we're going to say no to cheesy closing lines. And I have in front of me something I'm going to share with you. It's called The 7 Deadly Myths of Closing Sales. And it is by a friend of mine. His name is James Muir. And James and I are members of the same mastermind group. There are about 52 sales speaker consultants who are in this mastermind group, and we kind of help each other out. Even though ostensibly we're competitors, we kind of help each other out, and we just act as a brain trust or maybe brain drain for each other. I don't know, it depends on who's asking. But James had this book come out called The 7 Deadly Myths of Closing. And I really like what he had in here, so I'm going to read these to you. And feel free to jot them down if you like. That's perfectly fine. But here it goes. Myth number 1 when it comes to closing deals is this: sales gambits or techniques actually work. A sales gambit is a little cheesy trick or a catchy thing that you could say, a little questionable technique. So the myth is sales gambits actually work. But we have a lot of research about selling nowadays, and more coming in all the time, which refutes that. In fact, one study indicated the fact to that myth is this: sales gambits decrease closing success by 15%. Sales gambits decrease closing success by 15%. And let me tell you, by the way, this is very appropriate since we're sitting here in Mammal Hall at UNO. A lot of university business colleges these days are adding majors in sales. Now, when you and I went to school, almost 0 universities, business colleges had a sales degree. Still not so many, but more and more are getting it all the time. And some university business colleges that don't necessarily have a sales degree, or at least adding some sales programs and hiring some sales faculty, well, what comes with that? Original research. If you have a business college and a big school like UNO and you have a program in it, you have to do research in it. And so we're getting all of this awesome research. And so the good news is these little gambits that some people use, always be closing, the yes close, the Abraham Lincoln close, actually hurt you and decrease success by 15%. Myth number 2 is always be closing. Myth number 2 is always be closing. And the research says beyond the first attempt, there is actually a negative correlation between closing frequency and sales call success. I'll repeat that. Beyond the first attempt, there is a negative correlation between closing frequency and sales call success. So we do have to ask, but we want to wait for the right time. Because if you're the always be closing, pounce on them the moment they show any sort of vulnerability at all, you're actually going to hurt yourself. Myth number 3. Myth number 3. Closing gambits work on both large and small sales. Closing gambits work on both large and small sales. Not true. Here's the fact. Closing gambits are counterproductive above any sale worth $109. I don't know why that number, but they did some research, and apparently if you sell something worth more than $109, a gambit won't work. Below $109, gambit the hell out of it and do whatever it is you want to do to make a transactional sale. But unless you're selling a house in a really questionable neighborhood, you're not doing anything for under $109. So, closing gambits are counterproductive. Myth number 4. Well, closing gambits show you want the business. If you're always trying to do a little trick, you're always trying to push them a little bit, you're always trying to do some cheesy, sleazy technique, it just shows people you want the business, that you're serious, that you care. The fact says otherwise. The fact is, closing gambits damage trust. Closing gambits damage trust. Myth number 5. Well, customers are happier after making a decision, so using closing gambits is actually helping them. They don't know what they need. They just need to get the deal and live in that house happily ever after. If we push them, we're actually doing them a favor. Well, the fact is otherwise, as you probably guessed. Here goes the fact. Customers are less satisfied with their decisions made under pressure. Shocker there, right? Customers are less satisfied with any decision made under pressure. Myth number 6. Myth number 6, this one's a little bit different. The first 5 myths talked about a misperception that you should be really aggressive. Myth number 6 talks about a misperception that you should be not so aggressive. But here it goes. Myth number 6, the sale will close itself. I don't need to do anything because as long as I'm doing my job, they know they want the house. They'll just tell me they're ready. They'll just volunteer to give me their money. And here's the fact. You must make an effort to advance or close the sale. You must make an effort to advance or close the sale. Even though we want to, as the title of today's presentation shows, and I will prove here in a little bit, that we want to make the close a foregone conclusion, the customer, client, still sees you and me as the leader, okay? In many, many cases, they can know they want to list with you. They can know they want to buy a house you have listed. But in many cases, the average person will sit there and wait for you to tell them it's okay. It's like they wait for you and me to give them permission to move forward. It's just natural. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. There will be some people say, hey, let's write this up. And you're always like very thankful to that, right? When they say, hey, let's write that up. That's awesome. But oftentimes they will wait for you because the person who is the sales professional is deemed to be the leader by most clients. And the final myth, myth number 7, salespeople who fear asking for commitment cannot be helped. Salespeople who fear asking for the commitment cannot be helped. They're just hopeless sacks of failure, doomed to real estate mediocrity at best. Well, the fact is different. You can actually be helped. And the key is to figure out what you really fear and address it if you have closing reluctance. Okay? If that kind of creeps into your heart every once in a while. If you find yourself in a situation where you're kind of hesitating or procrastinating, getting them to sign the listing agreement or getting that would-be buyer to say, okay, let's fill out a purchase agreement and get this thing going, right? If you've got that, we need to ask yourself honestly, what is it? What is it that's causing you the problem? Is it a fear that you might be too pushy? Is it a fear that you could lose the sale? Is it a fear that you could be humiliated? Is it a fear that you've underprepared or underdelivered and you're afraid you could be exposed for that when you come time to ask for the business? Or are you ashamed to be in a sales position? Probably not. But a lot of people who work in a job in which they have to sell are secretly, or sometimes even not so secretly, actually embarrassed or ashamed to be in a sales position. And I think a lot of it is because, we think, I don't want to ask people, or maybe I should just be in some grand job in a big office dictating memos to some miserable secretary, as opposed to being in a job in which I have to go ask for business. Some people have that problem. The best thing you can do if you have some of that close reluctance is to sit down in quiet, in solitude, and ask yourself some honest questions. Why don't I have that? What is it that's driving me to feel that way? And when you know that, it's easier to address what it is that's bugging you. All right, we're going to move forward with the next thing about how do you actually go about closing deals, and how can you set up a situation to make closing deals super, super easy, or maybe a lot easier than some people think. First of all, let's start with a definition. We need to know what we're talking about. And this comes from Neil Rackham. Neil is the author of Spin Selling, good book. Some of you may have read it. He's kind of considered the pioneer of consultative selling. And Rackham said, a close is anything that puts the customer in a position involving some kind of commitment. A close is anything that puts a customer in position involving some kind of commitment. Given that definition, is a close simply asking for business at the end? Or is it something else? Right, that's right. It doesn't have to be just that. A close certainly is, one of the types of closes is asking for the business at the very end. But if you look at that definition right there, a close is anything that puts the customer in a position involving some kind of commitment. There are a lot of things that could technically be considered a close, right? Getting someone to meet with you is essentially a form of close. Some people call that a miniature close or a mini commitment. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But given the fact that we have that definition now, I'm going to do one of my favorite things as a presenter, and that is ask you a question from complete, total left field that makes you start to wonder about my sanity and why you're even in this class other than getting the free credit. And here's the question. Who's the greatest boxer of all time? What do y'all think? Who's the greatest boxer of all time?
Joe Louis.
I hear a Muhammad Ali. I hear a Joe Louis. Who else? Any others?
Bud Crawford.
Bud Crawford. Nice little Omaha reference. Congrats, Bud, for having the big Saturday night down at the, whatever the hell they call the CenturyLink Center. Who's next? Who's next? Who else? You got Joe Louis, Bud Crawford, Muhammad Ali. No one is guessing. Mike Tyson. Good. He was great in that Hangover movie. Who else? Who else? So Rocky Marciano. Yeah. That reminds me of the Coming to America scene, right? Okay. Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano. No one has said it. Who is the best fighter ever?
Fiction or real?
Rocky.
Of course it's Rocky. Who is it? How it took so long to guess Rocky? Of course Rocky. No. Rocky's not the best fighter. I would agree with Pat here. You said Muhammad Ali. I think Muhammad Ali is the greatest fighter ever. Bud Crawford, if he was Muhammad Ali's size, he would probably take anyone would take Muhammad Ali down now. But even back in his prime, Muhammad Ali, I think you can make an argument. Best fighter ever. Best fighter. And again, I don't want to get into a fight with anyone over this because I don't want to hurt my pretty face and I wear glasses. But at any rate, Muhammad Ali. Who knows, where was this picture taken? Well, first of all, who's this poor schmuck? Who's this guy? You know who this is?
Lewis.
Sonny Liston. Yeah, that's Sonny Liston right there. I don't know. This was a famous. Sonny Liston and Muhammad Ali had a.
New York.
Was it New York? It wasn't. It wasn't the Thrilla in Manila because that was Joe Frazier, right? All right.
Georgia.
All right.
Africa.
Some guy says, "Who cares?" Some guy over there's like, "On with the presentation, for God's sake!" All right, we don't know where it is, but I do know that this is Sonny Liston. It was a rough day for him. So why on earth would I put this on the screen for you? Here's why. This is a quote from Muhammad Ali. "The fight is won or lost, far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road long before I dance into those lights." What's this quote mean? Preparation, right? Preparation, yeah. When we look at this photograph, our eye goes where?
To his expression.
Right here, the expression.
Florida.
Big muscular. Is it Florida?
Miami was the first one.
There's this thing called Google. It's a miracle.
You got one.
Yeah. We have nothing less than the totality of all human knowledge in our pockets. And I appreciate it. What's your name, sir?
Casey.
Casey. There's the one person here who went and tapped into that totality of human knowledge.
I already knew. You already knew. I just wanted to confirm.
So we look at this face, right? And we look at a cool bicep and forearm and all that sort of thing. Standing up straight. Total picture of a winner, right? Who looks at this guy? Not as much. Not as much.
Sonny?
Yeah, Sonny. Sonny's mom probably didn't like that picture. But we're drawn here, right? We're drawn to the face and the arm and the glove and just the sign of victory. And when we see this picture, it is very tempting to get lost in the glory of this moment. It is very tempting. Most of us actually will identify with this guy, even though some of us it feels like we should live this guy's life. We tend to identify with this guy, right? Because that's the greatness and all that. And sometimes it's easy to think, what must it be like to have that moment? What must it be like to have that moment? And when we have those types of feelings, it's one of the biggest reasons why so many of us are sports fans and why so many of us love good teams or good athletes, because you kind of dream a little bit about what must it be like to be that guy at that moment. What we typically don't think of when we're seeing this guy at that moment was all the work that goes into it. The quote, "The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road long before I dance under those lights. If you prepare properly as a boxer, and then assuming you go into the actual match and do your very best, but if you prepare properly and you're better, is not the outcome of that fight, probably in 90% of the instances, a foregone conclusion? Yeah, it is a foregone conclusion. So what we need to do in the real estate world is the same thing. And I'm going to read a little passage I wrote about a foregone conclusion as a selling professional. Winning the sales race requires the investment of time, effort, and discipline. That investment is made long before you make the pitch. Too many people believe that success in sales comes down to the closing, a magical time when a slick salesperson utters the most eloquent, carefully chosen words, thus dazzling a spellbound buyer into helplessly making a purchase. Obviously, that is false. If you're waiting till the close to win the deal, you've already lost. Good closers start at the beginning, but with skill and deftness. Follow the proper steps, and the close is an anticlimactic formality, just one step in the long process. When you do it right, the close is a foregone conclusion. And you'll remember, we talked about many commitments. We said a close is defined as anything that puts the customer in a position involving some kind of commitment. So what we're going to do next is talk about the 10 commitments needed to close a sale. The 10 commitments needed to close a sale. And these commitments take place at various times. You may want to jot them down. I don't have them on the PowerPoint screen. I'm just going to read them to you. But these are the commitments needed to close a sale. And they come from a colleague of mine. His name is Anthony Iannarino, an amazing sales thought leader and author. By the way, he has a new book coming out today. It comes out today. And it's called Eat Their Lunch. Eat Their Lunch. Outstanding book called Eat Their Lunch by Anthony Iannarino. At any rate, in his previous book, he talked about the 10 commitments needed to close a sale. Number one is the commitment of time. The commitment of time. If we call someone on the phone, or we show up at their house, or they meet us or one of our colleagues at an open house, and they agree to sit down with us, meet with us, we have just made a miniature close. We just made a miniature close. As soon as they commit to give us their time, we've made a miniature close. The second commitment that we need to close a sale is the commitment to explore. The commitment to explore. If the person in front of us says that they're willing to consider options, to study, to learn, they've made the commitment to explore. And my friends, that's an easy commitment to get. Easy commitment to get. 3 is the commitment to change. The commitment to change. If someone is willing to change, it means they're willing to do something, right? Listing a house for sale is a commitment to change because it means you're no longer going to be in that house anymore. And therefore it comes with a lot of subsequent consequential changes and happenings in your life as well. If you can get someone to commit to change, meaning that they will say, yeah, I am willing, or I do want to, or I plan to live somewhere else, or I do want to, I am willing, or I plan to sell this house so I can go on with some other chapter of my life or accomplish another goal that I want to get behind me. You have the commitment to change, and you just made a miniature close. The fourth commitment needed to close a sale is the commitment to collaborate. The commitment to collaborate, and that means to work together with you, to explore problems together, to talk about possibilities together. If they're willing to sit down with you and talk openly and collaborate and be a partnership in the exploration process, that in and of itself is a miniature close. Fifth one is the commitment to build consensus. The commitment to build consensus. And that means, to consider options to go along with certain things. Sometimes if you say to a client, well, can we agree that XYZ, blah, 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 1, 2, 3. If they say yes, boom. That's building consensus, at least in one instance, and you've just made a miniature close. It also means this. In many cases, our sales involve more than one decision maker. And in our world, that more than one decision maker is translated typically into spouses, husband and wife, right? And so anytime we can get, if we're working with a husband and a wife or two siblings of someone who just passed away, who are trying to figure out what they're going to do with mom's house, whatever the case may be, if we can get those people to come to consensus, in many cases we've just declared a miniature commitment victory, and that's a mini close. 6 is the commitment of investment, the commitment to invest. And the commitment to invest means they are willing to put time, energy, and or money into a process or into a thing, okay? If they get them to say, yeah, I am willing to do this, or I am willing to invest that, I am willing to spend a certain amount of money in order to move up to a new house, whatever, you've got some sort of miniature commitment, the commitment to invest. 7, the commitment to review your proposed solution or idea, your proposed solution or recommended idea. If they are willing to review it, consider it, chew on it, take it under advisement, sleep on it, and get back to you the next morning, they've just committed a miniature commitment that they've given to you. Number 8 is the commitment to resolve solutions or subsequent problems. The commitment to resolve solutions or subsequent problems. What that means is you propose the solution, they review it, they come back, maybe there's something they don't like, maybe there's something that's making them nervous, holding them back. We talk about other possibilities. If they are willing to say, yeah, let's work through this, or yeah, we can work this out, or we'll figure out a solution that does work, they've made another miniature commitment. And then 9 is our favorite commitment of all. 9 is the commitment to buy. The commitment to buy. And remember, in our world, real estate agents are unique. We're unique because we have to close 2 sales every time, right? The first sale we close is getting the person to agree to list the property with us or declare us as their buyer rep, right? That's a sale, okay? In many businesses, you go through all that work, you're cashing a check. Not ours. Not in real estate. We have to have a second sale before we cash a check, okay? So when we're thinking about the commitment to buy, the number one most important favorite commitment of the 10 that are on the list, we also want to think of it in terms of, okay, listing or getting someone to agree to be our buyer rep client, and think of it in terms of, okay, I've got this house listed, or I'm representing this person, they've seen it 6 times, we've answered every question, it's time to go ahead and sign the contract, okay? But there's one more. You would think, what other commitment do we have needed to close a sale that is beyond the commitment to buy? And that is the commitment to execute after the sale, which in the real estate world is actually a very important commitment, because if the commitment to buy is signing a purchase agreement, God knows that that is often not the last step before we cash checks. And so the commitment to execute after the sale is also very, very important. Now, do you, and this is kind of a theoretical, philosophical question, I do not know what the right answer is, but I'm curious what everyone here thinks. Do you have to have all 10 of these commitments to close every sale? Okay, I'm seeing mostly no. Okay, no. Anyone say yes? Okay. I mean, I've thought about that, and I suppose theoretically, if you define the commitments broadly enough, and if you fly through them fast enough, maybe you could say yes, but I generally would agree no. I would generally agree no, because in certain situations you don't. And hey, every once in a while in our worlds, we do get kind of fortunate, right? When someone comes and says, I want this house, I want it right now, how fast can you write up the contract? Let's get this done. You're like, okay, glad you called me. But normally we have to go through steps and processes to make these things happen. Questions, comments so far about anything related to miniature commitments or the way I've defined and couched a close? Okay, you're going really easy on me. Which leads us to, so what really works, okay? We've spent some time talking about what do we do with all this stuff, where do we take it, where do we go, what actually works, what can we do to actually get deals to close? How do we do the Muhammad Ali thing and make sure we win because of the on the road, in the gym, and all the things I do before I dance under those lights? How do we do that? Step one is to really focus on client value. Step one is to really focus on client value. When you make the miniature close that is necessary to get a face-to-face meeting, you've got a golden opportunity, right? Because when we're prospecting in real estate, since our work is local, I mean, it is a blessing to have a local sales job. It is a blessing to have a geographically concentrated selling territory like real estate agents have. Because the number one commitment to get someone's time is easy when you can get them to kind of let you come by and talk a little bit or meet at Starbucks or whatever it is that you happen to use. It's way easier than if you have to do the whole damn thing on the telephone like a lot of salespeople, a lot of professions have to do. So we're lucky. But when we get that meeting, we make that first little mini close and someone agrees to meet with us. In that meeting, the single most important thing we can do is figure out exactly what it is that prospect values, exactly what that prospect wants and cares about, exactly what that prospect fears or is worried about or is sick of, and cater 100% to that, okay? I always like to say that value lives in your prospect's head, not your head. Value lives in your current clients' heads, not your head. On the face of things, that is probably just about the most obvious statement I could make here this afternoon. Yet people in real estate and every other profession forget that on a daily basis. And there's a reason for it. Pat?
I go back to the ABC that I use, only I add another letter. And it's always build customer relations.
No, ABCR. Yeah. Critically important. Because if we go through all that relationship stuff, that close becomes more likely to be that foregone conclusion. In fact, I like to call it building trust one step at a time. You meet a person, you build rapport, then you focus on the relationship, then you focus on trust. And the way you go from relationship to trust is by passing a moment of truth. Anytime you meet with a person, there will be an opportunity for you to either pass or fail a moment of truth. So if you want to build that relationship that Pat's talking about, pass a moment of truth. A moment of truth is a time in which you have the opportunity to tell the truth or lie, and you choose the truth. It's a moment in time in which you have the opportunity to do something you have to do or something that's above and beyond, and you choose the above and beyond. Do something in the client's best interest or your own selfish interest, you choose the client's interest. Pass one moment of truth, you got elementary trust. Pass lots of moments of truth over an extended period of time, you got deep trust. And so you're always looking for that. And there's another thing that might surprise you that actually helps build trust. All right? A thing that might surprise you when it comes time to build trusted relationships that is particularly important today. And that is absolute rapid responsiveness. University research has proven that the faster we respond, whether it's at the beginning of the relationship when we're just prospecting, middle when we're going through it, or we're getting close to closing, the faster you respond in the brains of the people you work with, that is associated, whether fair or not, it is associated with trustworthiness. So those people who are fast responders in real estate are deemed to be more trustworthy than those of us who are maybe procrastinators. Totally not fair, because you can have a devious jackass of a person who just happens to respond real fast, and he or she gets an undeserved fair pass, right? But it's fact. Who can tell me why the speed of responsiveness has been more associated with trust today than it was 20 years ago? Anyone know?
Technology.
Technology, 100% correct. Yes. Your name again, ma'am? Oh, you said
Mary.
it. Oh, Mary, I was going to give credit to someone else. I'm sorry. Okay. Although I'm sure she was thinking the same thing. Yeah, technology is 100% accurate. We already talked about the totality of human knowledge in our pockets and purses. But think about this. Let's say for the sake of argument, after this presentation, I go down to Epley, I get on a plane, and I go to Salt Lake City, Utah. And for the sake of argument, let's say I've never been to Salt Lake City, Utah before, but I'm staying in some hotel downtown, that Grand America Hotel. I really like that there. Let's say I'm at the Grand America Hotel down there, and I want to go out to dinner. What do? Get this, yeah. Google or Yelp or who knows what other
Right.
application is out there, right? Okay, and what do I get? I can go, anyone ever do restaurants near me?
Yes.
I do that all the time. It's my favorite one, restaurants near me. I travel a lot, restaurants near me. Not only do all the restaurants pop up, but they tell me how many feet I have to walk.
Yes.
I mean, that blows my mind. And I often wonder, is that to the front door or the counter or my table? I don't know. It tells me how many feet. And then what do I also see on there? Reviews. Lots and lots and lots of reviews that can tell me whether this place is worth a darn or not. I'm used to that now. I'm used to that. So that is why I consider you to be more trustworthy as a realtor if you get back to me, because Google tells me what I want to know in like 0.12 seconds or something like that. So that trust thing is critically important. And then the final thing about trust, the more specifically and clearly we communicate, the more trustworthy we are deemed to be. Okay, now one last thing about value that I didn't mention too, by the way. Who here has been in real estate for more than 20 years? Gosh, look around. We've got some good tenure here in this room. And I won't go any further than that because people get angry at me if I 40 years, and then people are just kind of, instead of going like this, they're going like that. So we'll stop it at 20. But wouldn't you say more than half the room raised their hands when I said 20? Okay, that's some serious tenure. Serious tenure. And 99 ways out of 100, having a lot of tenure is an advantage. But in perhaps one way out of 100, it's a disadvantage. Because the longer you've been at it, the more you've seen, the more you know, the easier it is to assume what they value. And if you make I call it the sin of assumption, the deadliest sin in selling. If you commit the sin of assumption, closing gets harder for you because you don't 100% know their value. When we get to the end, we want to talk specifically about what they value. Be service-oriented. In other words, them focused. People are more interested in what they will get out of a house than the features of a house. And for God's sakes, people don't care about you and me. They don't care how long we've been in the business. They don't care that NP Dodge has been around since 1855, as cool as that is. They don't care. They only care about what matters to them, and that is the stuff that they value that you get by asking probing questions and listening sincerely during those meetings. Has anyone ever heard the old saying, you don't buy a power drill, you buy a 1/4-inch hole? Okay? I would never ever buy a power drill. I don't go to Lowe's and buy a power drill. I go to Lowe's and I buy a hole. Okay? I want the hole that the drill makes. I don't care about the drill itself, and I think we have to forget that all the time because we need to be service-oriented, to be obsessed with what it is that they care about. Then we provide, boom, exactly that solution. The close becomes way easier. Think sequentially. I think sometimes we get so excited to get deals done that we want to sometimes rush people. And that's where the ABC always be closing comes in, and that's why it's such a critical mistake. We let people guide us down the path. All right? Sometimes we have to nudge people down a path a little bit, but I believe as sales professionals, it is not in our best interest if we jump ahead of someone as they're going down a path and start to tug and pull them down the path. I think it's better to gently nudge, but let them lead us down a path and think, what's the next step? Anthony Iannarino gave us 10 little commitments needed to close a sale. Don't jump to number 9. If you're on number 2, just focus on number 3 or number 4. Think sequentially. All right, use storytelling and humor. The more that we can share stories, the more memorable our message is when it does come time for us to talk. We're going to be so focused on discovering and learning and questioning and listening so that we can determine true value without assuming. But when it does come time for us to share exactly how our marketing services can help sell their house, or exactly how our representation services can protect them when they're negotiating for a house, or exactly why you should buy this house I have listed, when it does come time for us to talk, we want to, as much as possible, share stories to illustrate our point, because we people love those stories. And I always like to tell this little story to prove my point. Back in the 1700s, John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich in England, used to love to play cards. And he also liked to eat a snack while playing cards. But he was frustrated because he couldn't eat very well and play cards at the same time, especially if it was a competitive game with a lot of money on the line versus other neighboring nobles. So John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, came up with a genius invention. He decided to eat meat, between 2 slices of toast. That would allow him to eat and play cards at the same time. It was the invention of the sandwich, named after him. Now, fast forward hundreds of years, in 2018, there's actually a chain of restaurants in Orlando, Florida, called the Earl of Sandwich. And you'll never guess who owns this restaurant chain. A fellow by the name of John Montague. He is the 11th Earl of Sandwich and a direct descendant of the guy who invented the sandwich. Isn't that a cool story? Yeah. I went to the Earl of Sandwich at Disney once a few years ago and have a little message board about it posted on the wall. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. There's a whole business based on a story. Now, the sandwiches were quite good. I'm sure they have to be good to stay in business, but the business was based on a story. Now, I tell you that story for a reason. If you have a sandwich for lunch tomorrow, the odds that you will remember me and the information about the origin of the sandwich are very, very high. But if for some reason, God knows why, in this presentation, I were to put up a spreadsheet matrix with facts and figures about the sandwich, you wouldn't remember a damned thing about it. When they hook those little electrodes to people's heads, the research shows that you read that person a story, the computer printout lights up like a Christmas tree. If you show them a spreadsheet or a matrix, it flatlines like a dead person on an EKG. So we want to use the stories as much as we possibly can. Next, know your specific outcome. I think it's amazing that a lot of times we go into a meeting and we're not thinking, which one of those 10 miniature closes do I want to get today? You know, some of us will go into a meeting and we're just like, oh, I just want to, see what they're thinking, or want to see how I can advance this relationship. Well, that's not an outcome. An outcome is which one or 2 or more of the miniature closes do we want to get done today. Use other-oriented language. Gone are the days of what will it take to get you in this house today, right? And when it comes time for language choices at the very end, I think it's so important not to be flowery, not to be cheesy. I'm just a big believer in saying something like this. I like to summarize everything we talked about. Over the last few days, we've gone through X, Y, and Z. You shared with me that your concerns and your goals are 1, 2, 3. Because of that and the fact that you want to do something else of value that they told you, I am ready to do. And then you talk about the things that you can do that meet 100% exactly what they said. And you simply said, now's the time for us to go ahead and sign up and move forward. I mean, it's just super, super casual when we've done all of those things right to lead us to that foregone conclusion. Language does not matter very much at the end if you've done everything right in the first place. Language doesn't matter much if you've done everything right in the first place because you know exactly what they value, you know how you can deliver it, you've explained it, hopefully in a story or two, and it's time to get moving. Well, closing is natural and easy as long as you have earned the right to ask for and receive the business, which you do by creating value during each and every sales interaction. Again, from Anthony Iannarino, the previous book he wrote called The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need. Apparently it wasn't because he wrote 2 books since then, but maybe he just loved the money. Closing is natural and easy as long as you have earned the right to ask for and receive it, which you do by creating value during each and every sales interaction. All right, next question, since we're going to kind of keep our sports theme going here a little bit today. Who's the greatest hockey player of all time? That's an easy one. Wayne Gretzky. By the way, I have a, what, you don't like Gretzky?
Well, I like Gretzky, but I like Gordie Howe.
You think Gordie Howe's the best? Okay. Who's the best, is Gordie Howe still alive? Who? Is Gordie Howe still alive?
I think.
Oh,
Pull out the phone.
damn it, there goes that. I was going to say the living clown. All right. By the way, I have a client that I work with in Edmonton, Alberta. It's a commercial real estate company. I work with them every year. And I once showed them this photograph, and oh my God, they were so mad. Because I used a Los Angeles jersey instead of an Edmonton Oilers jersey. I almost lost a client right then and there. Thank God I built trust.
He says
Because
take off, eh?
Yeah, they were so mad, eh? Yeah.
Eh?
Anyone ever heard this line? I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. Okay, now some people say that Gretzky didn't really say that, he was quoting his father. Some people say that Gretzky was actually quoting his father, but this is nonetheless about the most famous quote attributed to the great Gretzky. And I have another little passage I'm going to close with here about future-focused thinking and closing for the future. Boxer Muhammad Ali would use one punch to set up his next more devastating punch. Hockey legend Wayne Gretzky once said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." Realtors need to think the same way. No sale should be made in a vacuum. Keep gathering information and keep building the relationship. You want a lifetime of sales from your clients, not just one. My grandfather was a really good pool player. And he used to amaze us when we were little, setting up these trick shots and all that. He'd bet guys in bars and, soak them for a bunch of money, which was kind of cool. And sadly, I didn't get any of that pool talent. I mean, it takes me half a day to get a rack of pool balls sunk into those little pockets. But my grandfather was really good at it, and he used to always talk about how every shot would set up the next one. Every shot would set up the next one. And I think the message for us in real estate is, what are we doing to set up the next shot? And I think that's a big part of sales. If you look at Anthony's and Reno's 10th miniature commitment, it was the commitment to execute after the sale. What if there was an 11th? And what if that 11th was the commitment to help you get a next piece of business, either from them or from someone to whom they would refer you? I'll leave you with that. We are at the end of our session. Hope everyone has enjoyed MarTech so far. And now one session to go, and then the reason everyone's here, the cocktail party.